live stream the message portion of the service. The camera is strictly on me. Nobody else will be shown, so you don't need to worry about being on the internet or anything like that. And then that recording is then placed on our website for those who could not be with us in person today. So it is good to have you all with us again today, and welcome to Holy Covenant. Will you pray with and for me, please? Sister Wisdom, may our hearts be open to what you would have us hear today. May all we speak and hear be an echo of your truth. Amen. Amen. So, this is the first Sunday in Lent, as I mentioned to Colin, that 40 days of preparation for Easter. And our theme this year, there's going to be a series, is on giving and receiving. So we're talking about gifts and the receiving of them, the sharing. And every Sunday we'll explore a little different aspect of that, of giving and receiving. How do we give to each other, to ourselves? How do we give to God? Do we allow ourselves to receive? Sometimes that's harder for people than giving. It's harder for them to receive. From what Luke says in our first reading today, it certainly appears that the adversary, however you want to imagine the devil or the adversary or Satan, so the adversary was willing to give Jesus things. Power, good things like bread when he was starving, protection, right, from falling. So that they sort of symbolize larger images of power and good things and protection. But there was a price, right? That Jesus worshiped the adversary, that which is worst in ourselves. The adversary, I like to think of the adversary as our own less than gracious interior selves. What we know to be not good, and yet we still want to do it or see it or feel it or say it. So the adversary demands our attention like a deity would, right? Demands worship, wants to be worshipped. Now, Jesus was alone there in the desert. He was isolated, he was lonely, he was hungry. He was pretty powerless in that moment. And he was tempted by those alternatives. And don't think that he wasn't tempted. Sometimes we tend to think of Jesus as being, sort of up on this pillar, and, he didn't really feel the same temptation, but he did. Because otherwise it would have been pointless for that to even happen, right? For there to be any temptations. If there was no question of him giving in, then why bother, right? But there was a possibility. So he was there and vulnerable. We have similar temptations in our lives, similar weaknesses. Sometimes we call them greed or arrogance or indulgence. The newest gadgets. We want the newest gadget. Never mind that they're often assembled in sweatshops for less than what we would consider a minimum wage. Our unthinking assumption that we matter more than others based on skin color, our abilities, our age, our gender, our education level, our sexual orientation, our religion. We place ourselves above others. Sometimes it's our assumption that we can protect ourselves from the difficult things in life because of our religious practice or our beliefs or where we live or our income or our choice of career. And the fact is that we all face those difficult times. Nothing can protect us from that. And the reality is that these temptations that Jesus faced, the ones that we face, are not cures for our loneliness or our hunger or our isolation. As soon as we obtain something we want, we're ready for an upgrade, aren't we? Right? or we decide that it wasn't really what we wanted after all, or it breaks, and then where are we? We fear isolation, but when we're in relationship, do we give our loved ones our best self or what's left over? We hide behind our fears with anger towards people we see as other because they're different from us. We're ready to receive these poisonous and short-lived gifts of things, power, and status, and to give away our allegiance to grace, to love, to the divine. But that's not where Jesus was. Yes, he was lonely, hungry, and must have felt powerless, but he, in spite of the temptation, did not give in to those temptations within himself. So Jesus' no can be a focus for us as we enter and move into Lent. What are our temptations? What could be offered to us that would make us give up what we hold most dear? What is closest to our hearts? A friend of mine had gone through the U.S. Army's Ranger training. Now, for those of you who aren't familiar with that, it's pretty intense, and it probably was more so when he went through it back in the 80s. The training involves a survival phase, right? Because Rangers are supposed to be able to be dropped in anywhere in the world and be ready to fight. So they're given instruction in how to survive in a variety of terrain, and then they're blindfolded and just dropped off in various locations by themselves. They're alone, and I think they're left for 48 hours. It might be longer, and all they have is a knife, their survival knife, and their wits. They have to find their own food, water, and shelter. Well, my friend, we'll call him Peter, was dropped in a Florida forest. He found water, but food was much more difficult. After 36 hours, he says, he began hallucinating, thinking he smelled hamburgers cooking, thinking he saw McDonald's shakes out in clearings. And at first he thought that maybe their instructors were taking pity on them and just sort of, leaving goodies around. And then, of course, he would go to them and they weren't there. It brought home to him how susceptible to temptation he was, which was probably part of the exercise. He said he knew in that moment he would do whatever it took to get that food. He was so hungry and it felt so real. Peter has said ever since then that were he ever captured, all the interrogators would have to do is starve him for a couple of days and then offer him ice cream. He loved ice cream. He'd cave. He knew that. So he knew what to fight against, right? And that's temptation in a nutshell. We want or need something so much, even though it is in truth maybe of little value, but that we are willing to give up something that we believe in, something we hold dear in order to get that thing that we want. So maybe the first thing to think about with giving and receiving is whether what we want to receive is worth what we are giving. We do that when we buy a car, right? We look at the car and we look at the price we're being asked to pay and the length of the loan term and the interest rate, and is it worth it? Is it worth that much? So much more should we do it when it comes to our beliefs, our faith. Or, if you look at it the other way, maybe a more positive way, is to decide what we will hold on to at all costs and recognize what is not worth it. So Jesus clung to his faith. He denied the comfort and safety his fears offered him, bread, protection, power. If only he would give in to those fears. He resisted. Remember, Jesus is preparing for his ministry. He's forming the basis of his ministry here, and he's determined that it will not be built on fear, arrogance, or greed, but on trust in the divine for all things, for safety, for wisdom, for hope. And we too can take those fears and turn them into hopes, our anger into courage, our hunger into strength, our uncertainty into our knowledge of God's abiding presence with us. With our courage, our strength, our faith, we can reach out to others and share those things. Give them what we've been given. We can also give it away without having any less ourselves. And as we move into the Lenten season, give and take. Give up fears and take on strength in all God's names.